2001 A Space Odyssey is famous for its special effects, its classic iconography, but also as a difficult film to understand, which is ironic, as 2001 is actually a fairly easy film to understand. It deals with some pretty basic themes: eating, surviving, evolving, but it also works on multiple levels, and it works on many of those levels at the same time, which makes the film endlessly fascinating and explains why it's one of the very greatest films ever made for so many people, myself included. 2001 is a film I've seen many times at different stages in my life. In other words, you can actually say I've lived these different levels. So, let's explore them each one by one so you too can touch the monolith and join the enlightened ones. The first level is probably the most complicated, or at least convoluted, so listen up. The essential story of 2001 is about an alien intelligence, represented by the monolith, guiding human evolution at distinct moments in our history. Firstly comes the monolith guiding our transformation from animal to man. The proto-apes at the start of the film are struggling to survive in a rather harsh world. One touch of an alien monolith gives our ancestors the bright idea of tool use, tools we then use to dominate our fellow animals and indeed other apes, leading of course to one of the greatest edits in cinema history. That tool, you might even call it a weapon, being thrown up in the air and cutting to another much later tool or weapon of humanity, a spacecraft. Stage 2 in our alien-led evolution comes from our discovery of another monolith on the moon. Touching that particular monolith makes it emit a radio signal that leads us to Jupiter and stage 3 of our story. On the way to Jupiter, we're treated to the subplot of a homicidal AI, Hal, but on arrival at Jupiter, we again encounter the aliens, as represented by the monolith. After rather a trippy journey, Dave, our only surviving astronaut, is taken into kind of alien custody, where he is prepared for his rebirth in the next stage of our evolution. And that's the Star Child we see at the end of the film. So, human evolution led by an alien force beyond our conception, ape to human to Star Child. That's the basic level 1 plot of the film. Next, it gets even more interesting. At our second level, the film is more concerned with what being human actually means. At the most basic level, this is about survival. At the start of the film, mankind is hungry. In fact, not to put too fine a point on it, at the start of the film, we are the food. For a trippy sci-fi experience film, a surprising amount of 2001 contains, or is even about, eating and drinking. And I mean a surprising amount. Eating, drinking, more eating, more eating, even more eating, being too old to drink, and killing. In order to survive, apes have to kill. Humans too. Even Dave, in switching off Hal, has to kill. Such are the basic facts of being a living creature. Understanding what it is to be human, and this is something really quite marvellous that the film does, comes from two opposite directions. Our ascension from mere animals, but also our distinction from or proximity to AI. As AI becomes increasingly smart, does it become increasingly human?
Do you believe that Hal has genuine emotions?
Well, he acts like he has genuine emotions. Of course, he's programmed that way to make it easier for us to talk to him.
It's no exaggeration to say Hal is the most clearly defined personality in the film, and it's no accident either. I'd go as far as to say Hal is the star of this movie, and that's all down to Kubrick's genius. Not just by allowing Hal to have the largest character arc in the story. Bear in mind, he goes from proud computer,
everything is going extremely well,
into paranoid killer.
Without your space helmet, Dave, we're going to find that rather difficult.
But also by so ingeniously contrasting Hal to the other human astronauts. Kubrick deliberately cast neutral-faced actors in the roles of Bowman and Poole, and made them act neutrally at all times. It's brilliant.
I'm having a bit of trouble with my transmitter and C-pod. I wonder if you'd come down and take a look at it with me.
Sure.
Not only to gain contrast for Hal, but also because it's based in reality. Astronauts were deliberately chosen by NASA from the military for their emotional neutrality. With Hal, in total contrast it feels, we have a computer that already thinks of itself as a conscious entity.
I am putting myself to the fullest possible use, which is all I think that any conscious entity can ever hope to do.
What's more, Hal seems to become more and more human as the film progresses.
But particularly in view of some of the other things that have happened, I find them difficult to put out of my mind.
So human, in fact, that it starts to develop faults. To err is human indeed. Firstly, Hal becomes paranoid when it thinks the humans are hiding things from it, which is precisely the moment Hal reports the fault in the comms gear.
Sorry about this. I know it's a bit silly. Just a moment. Just a moment. I've just picked up a fault in the AE-35 unit.
Dave, notice at this point, gives no change of expression, just a tiny inclination of the head to register interest. Dave is, of course, more concerned than he's giving away. We have to interpret so much through body language. And silence too. Check out that pause from Hal before he answers, "Of course I am."
You're working up your crew psychology report.
Of course I am.
That says so much, that pause.
You're working up your crew psychology report.
Of course I am.
And so, Hal and the astronauts begin to distrust one another. Paranoia develops on both sides, and this developing paranoia is classic Cold War thinking, which is of its time for the film. The mistrust gets worse and worse before the humans finally decide to cut off Hal, in effect, to kill the supercomputer, which our semi-sentient being hears by lip-reading the plotting astronauts. And so, Hal decides to kill the astronauts first. So now we have a homicidal AI, but in acting like this, it's clear Hal has become semi-human, semi-sentient. He emotes constantly, making him probably the most human-like character in the entire film.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
He's afraid, as he keeps telling Dave.
I'm afraid.
More relevantly, he's feeling. He can feel it, as he keeps telling us.
I can feel it.
The computer isn't reacting to facts anymore, but feelings.
I can feel it.
This process of humanizing Hal continues. As he dies, he sings a song learnt in childhood.
Daisy, Daisy, give me your answer, do.
It's a deeply moving section I understood instinctively when I first saw this film as a 10-year-old. Emotionally, this is the most eloquent section of the entire film. Even a child, like me, understands what's happening here. 2001 is also a film about dying. Anyhow, it's quite stunning movie making. In fact, one of the most brilliant empathetic manipulations in cinema history. Kubrick has managed to maneuver us into feeling sorry for a homicidal AI. So, what we have at subtext level is what it takes to be a conscious human being. Not just an eating and crapping human being, but one that feels, one that works with emotions. Don't forget the astronauts, like Hal, are also working on vibes.
I've got a bad feeling about him. Look, Dave, I can't put my finger on it, but I sense something strange about him.
All of which is to say, if you want to understand how Hal's story fits into the overall narrative of 2001, you need to combine both text and subtext. This film is about human existence and consciousness and what defines it. Both Apes and Hal strive to achieve this consciousness, and by the end of the film, Dave has developed, beyond these conceptions, into a new form of human consciousness. Did I say a new form of human consciousness? Well, that's one of the reasons why the film was so popular at the end of the 60s, with college kids that were dropping a lot of acid. Okay, everything clear? Because 2001 goes deeper, next to a level beyond words. For a film about what being human involves, there's remarkably little spoken dialogue. The start of the film has no language at all, and the first actual words don't even come until nearly half an hour into the movie. And it's not exactly a riveting first line.
Here you are, sir. Main level, please.
Meanwhile, the end is equally wordless, and even in between, we have long sections without the aid of any dialogue. Even more fascinatingly, much of the actual conversation we do get is either banal.
I talked to the accounting office in Houston yesterday, and they said that you should be receiving your higher rates of pay by next month.
Very banal.
Got any ham?
Ham.
Oh, yeah, there.
Or downright misleading.
But this epidemic could quite easily spread to our base. We should be given all the facts, Dr. Floyd.
Yes, I know.
Which is all quite deliberate, because Kubrick is trying to do something brilliant in this film. In his own words, to relay a non-verbal experience. Kubrick is attempting to show us a reality without falling back on language and words, and that means images play a huge part in what we're experiencing, but Kubrick requires another ally to convey this non-verbal experience, and that is, of course, sounds, in particular, music. 2001 is a film that communicates principally not through words but through images and music, often in union with one another. You could even compare it to the performance of a symphony in 4 movements. So we begin with a noise that sounds like an orchestra warming up. In fact, it's Atmospheres by Ligeti. But next up in our symphony comes the first movement, The Dawn of Man, where the incomprehensible monolith is again described in music by Ligeti. Music is doing a lot of the work of communicating this film. Notice how mankind's first thought comes with the onset of music. The second movement of our audio and visual symphony introduces man's exploration of space, and again, music and images work together to describe the elegance of modern space technology, such as the rotating space station, conveyed through the elegant spin of Strauss's Blue Danube Waltz. Briefly on the subject of superb visuals, I love how the space station is still being built. Such a great visual touch. And at the risk of sounding like the king of all boomers, I would also say sequences like these are made to be consumed on as large a cinema screen as possible, not a home PC. Anyhow, the third movement is the Jupiter mission, which is introduced with Khachaturian's Gaian Ballet Suite. It's a slower movement, more like an adagio, before we return to Ligeti for our fourth and final movement. And of course at the end, we complete the work with Strauss's Thus Spoke Zarathustra. I can think of no other film that unites the visuals with music as brilliantly as 2001. You can't really appreciate this film unless you enjoy this visual and oral but non-verbal storytelling. You need to understand the story at this level in order to understand the meaning that lurks at levels beneath the words and language of our usual reality. But we're not even at the bottom here. Time to explore those even deeper levels. So, why does Kubrick seek a non-verbal reality in his film? Well, put simply, the film is trying to convey truths and experiences that lie beyond our usual reality, beyond the remit and ability of our language. Such as, what's it like to be in the presence of an alien intelligence far greater than our own? For Kubrick, the experience of a vastly superior intelligence is the equivalent to the mystery we confront in apprehension of gods. So, yes, there's another level of storytelling at work here, but this is at the level of religion, or parable, or archetype, or even myth. which seems the appropriate point to dive down a philosophical rabbit hole and introduce the hairy whiskers of philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, who wrote at the end of the 19th century about our potential, once we recognise that God was dead, or our own God was dead, to achieve a greater form of being, the Übermensch, or Superman. Nietzsche uses the prophet Zarathustra as the herald for this development in our evolution, hence his book, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, which Richard Strauss, the composer, a dozen years later, turns into a tone poem, Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Music full of awe and revelation, and that is the music we hear both at the start and the end of the movie. Which gives us yet another layer in our evolution narrative. Mankind is evolving, and that evolution will take us into the realm of the Superman, or at least the super baby that Bowman becomes at the end of the film. So evolution once more, but at a far more profound, mythic level than just your average alien sci-fi narrative. At this level, the film is concerned with some of the most profound and basic aspects of what being man involves. For survival doesn't just mean eating, but also evolving. And evolving means birth and rebirth, which leads me to a final level of understanding 2001. As we explore deeper and deeper into these concepts, we strike upon a new and distinct level that articulates something about evolution, something about birth, something about creation. Artists conceive and create, which is what Kubrick is both doing and articulating throughout this movie. And that means there is a whole lot of sexual, or more specifically, birth imagery in the movie. Near the start, that imagery is more male, with bones and spaceships representing your more male tools. But as the film progresses, we're introduced to a whole lot more fully realised sexual imagery, with spaceships penetrating larger spaceships, a lot of them looking rather like sperm and spermatozoa and eggs. And then there's that obviously spermy, zygoty imagery in the final Stargate sequence, the part that warns us about the rebirth of Dave that we're about to experience, which means the entire film is loaded with images of birth, all those egg-like spaceships emitting little homunculi. This, at its heart, is a film about creation and birth. Even Bowman's experience of going through the airlock feels like another instance of being born. Remember, giving birth is a creative act, which really also describes art at its most fundamental aspect. And that leads us to one of the film's final images, when our very old, near-death Bowman points at the monolith. That's a literal setting of Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel and the famous representation of creation, the act of a human touching the divine that sparks human conception, human creation. 2001: A Space Odyssey has a look and feel about it unlike any other film. For a science fiction film, it has aged immaculately, and that's because of the intense concentration and thought and effort that Kubrick and many, many others put in to really articulate what a future reality might look like. Little wonder so many top directors revere this film. Its brilliance is written with care and detail into every frame. At this level, 2001 is a creative gift of its own. Yes, Kubrick is celebrating evolution and religion and technology in this mostly wordless wonder of a movie, but he's also celebrating something much closer to his heart in this hymn to creation, and that's the act of making art. 2001 is about the deepest, but also the most simple and essential questions. Why are we here? What makes us human? What is our purpose? And it answers those questions. We think, we feel, we eat, we kill, we survive, and we create. Occasionally, very occasionally, we even create masterpieces. Please like and subscribe.